And we're continuing with Chapter 9 of The Ultimate Evil, Investigation of America's Most Dangerous Satanic Cult by Maury Terry. The process. Looking back, I realized the indications were present all along. I never ignored them, but did keep them at a safe distance. Those first 4 months, slightly out of focus on the horizon, publicly, I'd hold them sequestered for 2 years. The reason I did so wasn't complex. The idea of satanic cult involvement in the 44 caliber killings was initially too bizarre for me to even want to consider. Such groups certainly existed. There was ample documentation for across the country, but my entire thrust was aimed at uncovering the presence of a single accomplice. Frankly, I didn't want to confront the implications or face the consequences of still more conspirators. As a result, I kept steering away from the signs. But inevitably, I was pulled back into the web, and after a time, I came to accept the unacceptable. The path of the old Croton Aqueduct in Yonkers passes between the rear of the car home and Berkowitz's apartment building. At one time, the aqueduct, an underground pipeline approximately 8 feet in diameter, carried drinking water from the Catskill Mountains watershed region to New York City via the Croton Reservoir in northern Westchester County. It was now obsolete. Above it, at ground level, one could walk a wide open path which snaked for miles through numerous Westchester communities. In the early 1990s, some Yonkers residents dug tunnels from nearby basements and managed to tap into the water supply. Although most were later sealed, apparently some of the old tunnels still existed, offering access to the now empty pipe from the cellars of a handful of aging homes in the area. Also, at select locations on the surface, entrance to the subterranean passage could be gained through hidden and long-forgotten maintenance portals. Once inside the aqueduct itself, it was possible to walk for at least several miles beneath the ground. The pipe was damp and musty, groundwater seeped through and rust at points, and vision was impossible without flashlights or candles. Behind the car home, the aqueduct path cut through a wooded area a mile to the north. It traveled through the lower reaches of Untermeyer Park, a sprawling, formerly lavish estate that had fallen into considerable disrepair. Once allowed Sam Tilden, a U.S. presidential candidate who lost the 1876 election to Rutherford B. Hayes. The land was purchased by wealthy attorney Samuel Untermeyer in 1903. Untermeyer, whom a British magazine labeled a Satanist, imported stone and statuary from England to embellish the landscape. After Untermeyer died in 1940, the grounds were assigned to the city of Yonkers. Partial restoration was accomplished, but crumbling stone outbuildings, weathered Grecian and Roman-style columns and sculptures, and acres of overgrown gardens, vineyards, and woodland dominated the site. The estate's main entrance was on North Broadway, but the property then sloped dramatically towards the Hudson River far below. On August 11, 1977, two young boys ages 11 and 14 were walking along the trail somewhat south of Untermeyer Park. They weren't out for a relaxing walk on the warm summer's day, searching through the tangled brush adjacent to the aqueduct behind Berkowitz's apartment. The youths were on a specific mission. They were looking for a grave. The previous Christmas, they found 3 dead German Shepherd dogs at the site, lying together in separate plastic bags. The boys had buried the animals, but now, hearing of Berkowitz's alleged hatred of canines, they believed their find might be connected to the case. At first, the police weren't interested. Yonkers detective Leonon Wyka said he thought NYPD wouldn't be concerned with the animals. They're satisfied they got their man, he told the Yonkers Herald-Statesman. However, after some publicity about the matter, Yonkers PD picked up the skeletal remains and had them autopsied. Two of the shepherds, which still had chains around their necks, were strangled. The third was shot in the head. At the same time, Laura Pisatero, 16, reported that Berkowitz had walked up and stared at her at 12:30 one night a few months before the arrest as she waited for her boyfriend in the parking lot behind 35 Pine. Laura, who had seen Berkowitz before, I smiled at him because I was scared. He didn't smile back. At first glance, Laura's statement appeared to be of little consequence. It wouldn't be unusual for Berkowitz to be spotted in the parking lot of his own building, and the 12:30 a.m. time estimate meshed with an hour he'd be home since his postal shift ended earlier. But there was a twist to the girl's account, a nuance missed by the police. She said Berkowitz was walking a dog that night. Berkowitz, however, didn't own a dog. So whose animal was it, and why did he have it? The 3 German shepherds on the aqueduct had been slain, 2 of them strangled. Was that the intended fate of this dog? If so, it would have taken a considerable effort for Berkowitz to try it alone. German shepherds don't passively resist strangulation attempts. Additionally, if Berkowitz in fact hated dogs and regarded them as fearful demons, it was incongruous to think that he'd be out for a moonlight stroll with one. I'd already learned that he had a dog, luckily as a child, and that he also got along well with the guard dogs at IBI Security. So what was going on? As for Laura, she knew Berkowitz by sight before this incident, and her account was credible in other respects. In analyzing the case, I noted the dead German shepherds and the dog-walking observation with large asterisks. At this time, I didn't know of the satanic cult litter found in Berkowitz's apartment, or that still more German shepherds were slain in the area. Several days after the police removed the bodies of the shepherds in Yonkers, yet another Berkowitz dog incident surfaced. Mrs. Florence Larson, a portly, pleasant Bronx housewife, was active in a volunteer agency known as PAWS, People for Animals Welfare Society. Mrs. Larson had come by an unwanted German shepherd named Big Boy in her neighborhood and transported him to a kennel in Mamaroneck, Westchester County. She then placed an ad in the Westchester newspapers advertising that the dog was available for adoption. On Monday, August 8th, someone calling himself David Berkowitz phoned her to inquire about the German Shepherd. As Mrs. Larson later told me, it was about 10:30 in the morning. He said his name was David Berkowitz and that he lived on Pine Street in Yonkers. We always try to screen the callers, so I asked him about himself. He said he once had a dog and gave it away to his girlfriend, and he now wanted another one. He told me he was in the service at one time. He sounded like a nice person, a responsible person, so I told him where the dog was being kept. He said he would drive up to Mamaroneck to see the dog. And then another call came later the same day. The person told me his name was Jeff and that he fixed cars behind Pine Street in Yonkers. I thought it was very strange to get 2 calls about the same dog that both mentioned Pine Street in Yonkers. He also said he'd go to see the dog. Berkowitz was arrested 2 days later, said Mrs. Larson. I had his name on a piece of paper. I told my husband, "Hey, this guy called me about a dog. He'll never get one now." Mrs. Larson then called Mamaroneck facility to ask if Berkowitz had in fact shown up there. Jay Baldwin, a veterinary student at Cornell University who was working at the kennel during the summer, told her he thought the alleged killer had indeed visited the premises in the company of another young man. Police were then called in by kennel employees, but NYPD soon determined Berkowitz didn't visit the shelter after all. I would later see a photo of the man police decided had appeared at the kennel, and he did resemble Berkowitz. The man's companion, first thought to be a possible 44 accomplice, was also identified, although this information was withheld from the public. I have no disagreement with this assessment by NYPD, but in ruling out the Berkowitz visit and proclaiming at the same time that no accomplice existed, NYPD Chief of Detectives John Keenan conveniently forgot something of importance. The police came back to me and told me Berkowitz didn't go to the shelter, said Florence Larson. Okay, I answered. But did you question them about the phone call from Berkowitz or someone saying he was Berkowitz? I sure did, I said. Well then, who called me? They told me someone just must have used his name. Someone just must have used his name? Really? I was shaking my head in bemusement. And what about the second call about fixing cars behind Pine Street? He could have meant CARRS, you know. They're behind Pine Street. They didn't think it was curious that you'd get another call mentioning Pine Street which inquired about the same German Shepherd? They didn't say anything about that call, she replied. They just said he didn't go to the shelter and someone must have used his name calling me. 2 days before the arrest, I interjected. Yes, that's the day it was. You can see when the ad ran in the paper. I know, I already have. Whether Berkowitz actually visited the shelter constituted only half the story. The police apparently neglected to see that the important issues of the phone calls remained. Someone, 2 days before his arrest, gave Berkowitz's full name and address to a third party in a conversation which linked him tightly to German Shepherd dogs, a breed of animal that had been turning up dead with distressing regularity around Pine Street. It reeked of a setup, yet NYPD discounted it. Berkowitz, writing 2 years later, would say he didn't visit the kennel, but as for the phone call, someone must have used my name. Yes, I will agree with this. He refused to nominate any candidates. In the course of 4 interviews, I found Mrs. Larson to be an entirely credible witness. Sometime later, Detective Captain John Plankster of NYPD would interview her again. In the wake of an article I published, she was believable. I had no reason to doubt what she said, Plankster would acknowledge. Her story was consistent and her memory was excellent. Later, another important connection would be established between Berkowitz and an animal shelter, this one in Yonkers. There was, I reasoned in mid-December 1977, a considerable log of accounts linking Berkowitz to dogs, especially German Shepherds. Carr's dog, which was wounded, was a black lab, but that was an exception. The Nito dog shot Christmas Eve 1976 on Wicker Street the day before the boys discovered 3 more, was a German Shepherd, as were others previously referenced. Satanic cults sacrificed animals, including dogs and cats, but why only German Shepherds and Yonkers? Research had led me to acknowledge that groups of dead German Shepherds, presumably sacrificed, were found in recent years at scattered locations across the United States, including Houston, where the 44 was purchased, both Northern and Southern California. Authorities reported similar findings, as did police in New England, and I would learn that several more were found in Minot, North Dakota. A total of 85 skinned German Shepherds and Dobermans were found in Walden, New York between late October 1976 and October 1977. Officials believed a cult was behind the killings. The site was only an hour's drive from Yonkers, and people later connected to the Son of Sam case were known to have frequented that vicinity. Cults dispatched animals for a number of reasons. Sacrifice to Satan was a primary incentive. Blood was also used in fertility rites and was often consumed from a chalice stolen from a church. When found, the animals might be skinned, hanged, shot, or even strangled. The strangulation often occurred because the animal was hanged from a tree limb and its throat cut to drain the blood. The parts were sometimes removed for mixture in a potion or because they were thought to possess magical powers. As aberrant as these practices sound, they aren't the product of the mind of a demented Hollywood scriptwriter. They are real and are being performed today. Law enforcement officials across the country can attest to that statement's veracity. Dale Griffiths, retired police captain of Tiffin, Ohio, and a recognized authority on cult practices, told me the public is generally not prepared to accept the fact that these killer groups exist, and neither are many law enforcement people. Some police agencies who have dealt with these cults learned the hard way on how real they are. Oh, my dramatic looking is getting me fucked up. Okay. The public is generally not prepared to accept the fact that these killer groups exist, and neither are many law enforcement people. Some police agencies who have dealt with these cults learned the hard way on how real they are and how elusive they also are. But these activities are so bizarre, so apart from the norm, that many police are public alike will contrive any explanation at all to rationalize away the crimes that are obviously cult connected. There is a massive education program to conduct, Griffin said. Oh, yes, there is, my God. We won't need horror films anymore if this is public knowledge. Berkowitz himself astutely observed that society's reluctance to face up to the fact that cults are slaughtering animals and humans is one of the movement's greatest strengths, a primary reason killer satanic groups are able to flourish. If you don't want to deal with something, pretend it isn't there. He said, but it is indeed there. There has been no census of the number of witchcraft and satanic cults active today in the United States, but the number is certainly in the thousands. Fortunately, the majority of these groups are benign or white witchcraft covens that are often termed, but not all of them. The witchcraft phenomenon began in Europe in the Middle Ages. In time, it surfaced in America, and anti-occult hysteria triggered the infamous Salem Trials in Massachusetts in 1692. Oh, that's a great story. John Todd came from the Collins family, and his family came over to the Salem area in Massachusetts, and they were actually the witches, and they were the first people to point at somebody else and say, that person and that person is a witch. Indeed. Legends and beliefs concerning the powers of witches around in folklore and to many of the United States, the stories are just that, fables fueled by superstition, but there are believers, and those who practice the old religion, as it is sometimes called, or Mariah the Conquering Wind. Some devotees operate alone, others join a coven. In total, there are many thousands of witchcraft advocates casting their spells in modern America, as they did last year and the year before that, publicly on the news. As indicated, the preponderance of these are relatively harmless. Puritists point out that a murderous devil cult should not be confused with the numerous benign covens which dot the landscape of the United States. To an extent that admonition is accurate. Not everyone who smokes marijuana advances to heroin addiction, nor does every social drinker become an alcoholic. But just as addicts are initiated on pot and alcoholics emerge from the cocktail party set, hardcore Satanists frequently earn their stripes in the lower ranks of occult curiosity or white witchcraft. Witchcraft, per se, is not illegal, and most covens ostensibly operate within the law. There has been an ambitious public relations effort undertaken in recent years to present witchcraft in an acceptable light. But the fact remains that while some groups claim to celebrate nature, or the religion of Gaia, many others pay homage to Satan. That is their tradition, and they honor it. A typical coven consists of 13 members, but that number varies often. The group will meet regularly, usually at the full moon. These gatherings are known as sabbats. Several times each year, according to witchcraft calendars, grand sabbats, major festivals, are celebrated. Grand sabbats occur, for example, on All Hallows Eve, October 31st, and on April 30th, Walpurgisnacht, or Walpurgisnacht. It's spelt Walpurgis. I do that because I wanted to look it up for myself, and there is no V in there. It's German. Walpurgisnacht. Walpurgisnacht. Anyways, continuing on. For the purpose of blasphemy, some major holidays coincide with important Roman Catholic holidays. Others mark the dates of old pagan festivals. They are one and the same. Do not confuse them. Fucking Catholics. Not the people of Catholics, the Pope and all that, Constantine and Pope Sylvester, the fucking homos. As mentioned, covens pay homage to Satan just as traditional religions honor God. Accordingly, in defiance of the Catholic Church, the concept of the Black Mass evolved during the Middle Ages. So much knowledge is lacking for my fellow man. The Black Mass is an actual Mass because the Sabbath was on Saturday, and Saturday was for Saturn, and Saturn's color is what? Black. That's why priests wear black. And Satan, Saturn, Saturnalian worship. Just a food for thought. In the Black Mass, Satanic prayers were substituted for those contained in Catholic service. The Lord's Prayer was recited backwards, crosses were inverted, black vestments were worn, chalices and hosts stolen from churches were used in the rituals. Elements such as feces, urine, vomit, and animal blood were also employed. The host was sometimes smeared with feces, or vomit and urine was frequently poured into the chalice and consumed. Animals such as dogs and cats were sacrificed to Satan and their blood drunk in fertility rites or for other purposes. Some covens questing for the ultimate sacrifice offered humans to the devil. Some contemporary witches, trying to distance themselves from their own traditions, discount the volumes written concerning the Black Mass and human sacrifice. Others readily acknowledge that such rites existed at one time. Some will even concede that militant, drug-ridden, hardcore Satanist covens active today have carried those practices into the 1980s. It is that element that is of concern in this narrative. I raised the subject of the dead German shepherds with Larry Siegel, he of the Woodlawn Cemetery caper, while visiting his home in mid-December. Larry, 27, was a well-informed researcher and professional writer. He'd often spend some time checking into the occult and was ready with an opinion. You've heard of The Process, right? Well, The Process kept German shepherds. Oh my. Oh, The Process. That was a fantastic article. Look up Mint Press and look for the article on The Process Church. CIA. The Process? I've only heard a little about them, but we want someone who killed German shepherds, not kept them. You've got to remember that cults split up and changed their names. They're as varied as other religions. They worship one deity, but they do it under different names and practices. Like the Great Schism in the Catholic Church, or like the dozens of Protestant sects that started really when Martin Luther nailed his complaints to that door? Yes, Larry responded. That's the basic idea. They keep what they like, discard what they don't, and sometimes adapt practices that's just the opposite of the parents' groups. Like, oh yeah, like, do as thou wilt. But they forget the next line is, oh, well, do as thou wilt is the whole of the law. The next line is, love is the law. They conveniently leave that out. Just do as thou wilt, you know? Following Larry's reasoning, I asked if we might be looking for a process splinter group that, instead of keeping dogs, was killing them as an act of defiance or a sign of independence. That could make sense, Larry agreed. These satanic cults are religions, too, perverse and sick, but still religions. Yeah, and in that context, since shepherds are a strong breed, they might also represent a higher or more pure form of sacrifice, like the offering of a virgin in pagan days, I said. They're also known as police dogs, Larry added, emphasizing that satanic cults, like organized religions, begged and borrowed ideas from other sources. So there might not be a blueprint. It might be a mixed bag of philosophies. And just what do you know about the process? I'm just getting my feet wet in all this, I answered, explaining that I knew the group had been in California and few other U.S. locals after emigrating from England in the 1960s. I told Larry the cult was barely more than a name to me. A dangerous name, he stated. Larry gave me an apprehensive look. This already involves mass murder, I reminded him. It's already in that league. But if all this is true, it could get pretty damn unnerving before it's finished. What are you saying? I'm saying that we're off on this great adventure here, but these people think nothing about blowing heads off. Larry paused and shook his head. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I could see he was uncomfortable with the course of the conversation was taking, so I narrowed the discussion to the reason we had convened this December. Ooh, convened this. Yeah. So I narrowed the discussion to the reason we had convened this December Saturday. 5 days after the Sleeping Berkowitz photos appeared, I'd gone through about a dozen books on witchcraft and the occult and found some close parallels to the Sam letters. Taking the Breslin and Borelli notes from a folder, I spread them out on the dining room table. Larry produced a set of notes and a stack of occult books. The information we'd uncovered, it turned out, was nearly identical. When we finished comparing the data, we convinced satanic references peppered the letters. A crazy guy who imagines demons is a far cry from somebody who's up on occult terminology, I said. Yeah, Larry concurred. Whoever did these letters knows a lot about Satanism and witchcraft, but couldn't that have been Berkowitz just reading up on this stuff like we did? It could have been, but if that was so, we'd have to forget about the handwriting problems, the composite sketches, the Moskowitz scene, John Carr, and the dead the shepherds. Larry sat back in the chair. Then I think there's a cult involved. Are you sure? As sure as anyone can be with what we have to work up. As sure as anyone can be what we have to work with up until now. What kind of cult? Not some hocus-pocus group of witches, but something like the Process, or those Satanists who dug up that British cemetery a few years ago and drove stakes through the corpses' hearts. Well, I think we've got a cult here too, in some form or another. We have no proof at all. Zip. The clues are all over the lot, but we'd get destroyed by the cops if we tried to push this now. I'm sure the Post wouldn't go for it either. We also didn't know if the suspected cult planned the 44 attacks with all its members involved, or if it only served as a catalyst or an inspiration for Berkowitz and someone else, like John Carr, to do the shootings. If they were all in it, we'd be dealing with 13, right? If it's a typical coven, I asked. That's the traditional number, Larry answered, but some stick to it, some don't. This doesn't sound like people who pay strict attention to tradition. Larry picked up the Breslin letter. See the alias? I think that may be the answer. It was the 22 Disciples of Hell. As we had discussed, the Sam letters were sprinkled with occult references. In the Borelli letter, they included Wemon, W-E-M-O-N, as in demon, brat, as an imp or small devil outsider, the title of an occult book, Beelzebub, the demon known as the Lord of Flies, the hunt, a reference to the goddess Diana, queen of Black Sabbath and leader of the wild hunt, and I'll be back, words identical to those spoken by Satan in the book Black Easter. In addition, the Borelli letter contained above references to blood drinking and satanic practice. When we reached the name of Behemoth, the infernal watchman and demon of gluttony, I asked Larry, do you know how Behemoth is depicted in the occult? As an elephant, right? Yes, and do you know the Latin word for elephant? No. It's Eliphas. Does that ring a bell? Larry let out a long whistle. Sure, the Eliphas disco in Queens where the shooting occurred. Yeah, this letter was left this letter was left at the April shooting in the Bronx. The next attack happened outside the Eliphas. Larry nodded, and look at this, he blurted. The next paragraph talks about the Weeman of Queens. It's Eliphas and Queens back to back. If this stands up and knocks down the random shooting idea the cops are pushing. Exactly. It would at least mean a location was chosen in advance. And who knows who or what else might have been, Larry added. That's the point, I said. The police have built a house of cards, and we're trying to prove it's just that flimsy. We don't have to come up with all the answers. If we can show Berkowitz didn't do just one of these shootings, we've knocked down the whole thing. Like, who really wrote the letters, Larry said. That's another thing. The Borelli letters sounded as if it was written inside the car home. The text was clearly from the viewpoint of someone in that house, not from the Berkowitz apartment, high on the hill behind it. The telling phrases include behind our house, locks me in the garage, looks out the attic window, ties me up in the back of his house, and there was also some extremely personal references to Sam Carr's health and habits in it. It was certain that someone who knew Sam Carr well and hated him had a hand in the composition of the Borelli letter. What do you think, John or Michael? Larry asked. I don't know who printed it, but I'd bet you anything one of them provided the words, at least some of them. He spelled honor the British way, too, with an O-U-R. Does that sound like Berkey from the Bronx? No, it doesn't, Larry laughed. I'd also say whoever wrote this was stoned on something when he did it. Sounds so crude when compared to the Breslin thing. It's just off the wall. Larry reached for an occult work entitled The Book of Ceremonial Magic. You talked about Behemoth and Eliphas being the same thing, he said. Take a look at this. On the cover of the book, a large circular symbol of obvious occult derivation was staring at me. I shrugged and asked Larry what he was getting at. Look at the inner circle near the center, he advised. It looked like a graphic symbol on the Breslin letter. It wasn't exact, but all the elements were there. It was very similar to the Sam symbol and was identified as the goetic circle of black evocation and pacts. On the inside pages, I read a section which explained the symbol's origin. I almost dropped the book. The symbol was created by famed 19th century occultist Eliphas Levi. It was another Eliphas link. The Eliphas disco and Eliphas Levi, I said slowly. It's spelled with an I instead of an E. But I don't think that matters, Larry said. It doesn't matter a bit, I agreed, and studied the Levi symbol more closely. On the outer perimeter of the circle there were several words written at intervals around the circumference. One was Berkial. Another word, Amaskarak. Amazarak. One of Berkowitz's nicknames is Burke. I advised Larry, and we know how backward words and phrases are part of satanic practices, like saying Our Father backwards. So, look at Amask, Amask, Amaz, Amazarak. So look at Amazarak backwards. It is Kar Asama, or Sam Carr. Jesus Christ, Larry exulted. When they found the symbol, they must have flipped. It ties to Eliphas and now this. It was perfect for them to base the Sam symbol on it. It was, we found, a symbol most identical to the son of Sam's that was drawn by Eliphas Levi and contained Berkowitz's nickname and Sam Carr's name. Then the shooting that immediately followed the use of the symbol in the Breslin letter occurred outside the Eliphas discoeth. I've never heard of the full name of disco until now, so forgive me. I say they hit at Eliphas as some symbolic act, as cutely tipping their hand with the symbol in the Breslin letter and the behemoth Eliphas reference in the Borelli note. I stated they were letting it out in advance where they were going to hit, as they always do. Revelation of method. If you're too stupid not to understand what they're saying, they believe they are absolved from any karmic guilt. Larry's response was subdued. If the symbol at the disco were both named Jones, that'd be another matter. But not Eliphas, we're beyond coincidence. I don't like this feeling I'm getting. It's like we're inside somebody's head out there, somebody that scares the hell out of me. We quickly went through the remainder of the Breslin letter. There was another allusion to blood drinking along with the phrase spirit roaming the night. However, the most important satanic clue was contained in the first letter sentence, hello from the gutters of NYC, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. These elements, as listed in numerous occult books, are explained earlier, as were used in the Satanic Black Mass, a full-scale mockery and debasement of the Roman Catholic Mass. The Roman Catholic Mass is a debasement of Christianity in itself anyways. And the allusion to stale wine implied more than apparent stale was also a synonym for animal urine. In other words, animal urine was drunk instead of wine in the ritual. So now we've got the Black Mass too, Larry said. It's like they were hinting all the while, but no one picked up on it, as that's what they do. I don't think anyone wanted to, I observed. I was sure people in the occult underground understood the meaning of the Breslin letter, but they either remained silent or the police didn't listen. I recalled that on the preceding Halloween, the CBS Nightly News had wrapped up its broadcast with a lighthearted feature about a parapsychology convention being held in New York City. Right there on camera was a flip chart with the Sam symbol on it and wording about occult influences in it. I said, there was a camera pan, they didn't talk about it, but there it was on national TV and nobody catches it. But this association obviously knew about some of the references. I guess it just sounds so damned unreal. To us in the mainstream it does, Larry countered. It's a whole other culture. There are people out there who take this stuff very seriously. And it looks like we've run into some of them. Wonderful. As if to illustrate his point, Larry reached for another book, the Encyclopedia of Witchcraft and Demonology. We're new to this. These people aren't. He said, indicating a passage for me to read. In New York, the covens have become largely warped and perverted. A twisted sexual element has crept in more and more until today they are sadomasochistic, often homosexual, and are using the occult as an excuse. Criminologists studying these matters suggest that when such people are tired of their staged activities, they are liable to turn ritual, motiveless killing. The alarming fact is that many such murders occur in the United States today, and even right now. The warning was plain and was echoed in other publications we studied, and during the ensuing years its validity continued to ring out through the course of the investigation. New York and California seem to be spots these authors highlight more than any place else, I noted. This is all hitting me right in the face. This is all hitting me right in the face, yet I'm still antsy about it. Yeah, Larry agreed. Knowing and proving are two different things, but you can't go out and infiltrate a cult. Hell, we don't even want to know where it is, I said. These people don't put ads in the paper. This is middle of the night stuff. We find what they leave behind like the dogs. But where the hell are they? We've got to keep looking, Larry observed, and keep quiet. Larry chuckled nervously. You don't have to worry about me saying anything. Living has become a lot of fun the last few years. The talk of murder and death was disconcerting. We simply didn't want to believe we were in treacherous waters. In fact, I refused to acknowledge that we might be. The atmosphere had a decidedly surrealistic spice to it. We were circling the beast, observing it, and trying to maintain it could never move against us. I had seen enough Hollywood depictions of witchcraft to rebel at the reality. The temptation to laugh it off was there, but on the other hand, so were the documented references and other evidence we found. Now, despite my anger at the police, I suddenly understood their reluctance to sail the river Styx to the realm of Satan. There was a lifetime's worth of conditioning and prejudice to overcome, and it wasn't easy to accomplish. Nonetheless, I still couldn't excuse the official unwillingness to investigate a Son of Sam conspiracy per se. Accomplices, whether Satanists or truck drivers, were still accomplices. Larry and I concluded our session by comparing the dates of the 44 shootings with a satanic witchcraft calendar which listed the major occult holidays, occasions that called for some form of sacrifice to Satan. The police had been puzzled because there seemed to be no discernible pattern to the Son of Sam attacks, but we found one. With one exception, the shootings occurred proximate to occult holidays, of which there were only about 10 each year. If there was one a week, this wouldn't mean a thing, I said. It's still not positive proof. But along with everything else, we're building a strong circumstantial case at least. The attacks hadn't occurred exactly on the holidays, but we reasoned that the shootings were public displays. Oh, God. And the cult may have done other things privately on these days themselves. They needed to find victims. Maybe they failed on the actual days or only intended the hits happen as close as possible to them, I offered. Larry had a further explanation, suggesting that the group may have had to report on a shooting at a cult meeting to do the deed and then describe it to the assemblage. He also believed that the cult met at least once a month on the full moon and convened once again on major holidays. You know too much, I joked. Why don't you confess now so we can get this over with? For all his professionalism, Larry understandably had a weak stomach regarding this subject. You can imagine those people drinking urine and dog blood? They've got to be high on acid or something to do it. Here, take this damn list. They've got a holiday coming up. You can have fun and stake out Pine Street at midnight. Send me a telegram if they show up. In fact, the upcoming December 21st, St. Thomas Day, was a satanic feast. The Son of Sam shootings, compared with the witchcraft holidays or Sabbats, appeared in the following manner. Son of Sam Witchcraft Holiday, July 29th, July 23rd, 31st. August 1st, Lammas Day. October 23rd was another Son of Sam shooting. October 31st, All Hallows Eve. November 22nd, Son of Sam shooting. November 30th, St. Andrew's Eve. January 30th. February 2nd, Candleman's Day. April 17th, another Son of Sam shooting. April 24th, St. Mark's Eve. And April 30th, Walpurgisnacht. June 26th, June 23rd, Midsummer's Eve or St. John's Eve. Jesus. Larry and I are aware of some cults celebrated Good Friday, so we considered it possible that the April shooting, the Borelli letter left at that scene mentioned Easter, might actually have been geared to feast that day. On the March 8th murder of Virginia Volkericane matched no occult festival, however. That shooting broke both the weekend and time of night pattern, I noted. Maybe they went off their schedule for a reason we don't know about. It could have been a leader's birthday, Larry said. That's always the highest of all holidays, on an individual basis. Our meeting had been successful, resulting in the discovery and confirmation of significant connections to Son of Sam. But the information, while strong, was still circumstantial. There was more work to be done. Essentially, there were several directions to travel, each of which could lead to a corroboration we sought. Number 1. We could find the cult itself and link it to Berkowitz. Number 2. We could uncover evidence that puts someone involved in the case, Berkowitz, one of the Carr brothers, or someone whose name was still unknown, into a cult. Number 3. We could continue to accumulate evidence which demonstrates Berkowitz didn't act alone, whether that evidence linked to a cult or not. The paths were separate, but at the same time they theoretically converged at one point in the future. As repugnant as the idea of a satanic cult was to me, I knew I'd be as remiss as the police if I disregarded the information we assembled. I knew it was accurate. The research material we'd obtained was in black and white, but there was still a considerable number of unknown factors. Back at home in White Plains, I phoned Jim Midigar and briefed him on the newest developments. We arranged to meet the following week. When Midigar arrived on Wednesday evening, December 14th, we drove to New Rochelle, where we unsuccessfully attempted to pursue the Cassara Fred Cowan Berkowitz connection. The case was now branching out in many different directions, and we were few in number. We risked spreading ourselves out too thin on what was already a part-time effort for all of us. As Christmas neared, I made several phone calls to North Dakota seeking John Carr. I found 2 people with the same name, neither of whom was John Wheaties. I represented myself as an old, distant acquaintance from the Air Force, but the John Carrs I spoke to were Army veterans. We also phoned authorities in Los Angeles, where the Hillsdale stranger killings had begun. It can't hurt, Midigar said. He was called a rapist and suffocator in the Breslin letter, and that's what's happening out there. Maybe it's a stroke of blind luck. It'll turn out to be him, or maybe they'll at least be able to locate the bastard. John Carr, however, wasn't in Los Angeles. Midigar and I also visited each of the Son of Sam scenes where we sketched maps, noted nearby streets, and tried to develop indelible mental images of each location. To enhance the project, we took a number of photos and reenacted the circumstances of each shooting as best we could. The trip to the Brooklyn scene was my third. Earlier, I dragged George Austin, and later another friend, to the site. Each time, as I explained the scenario, my companions agreed serious contradictions existed on the official version of the shootings. Midigar, ex-police officer, voiced similar sentiments and decided to pursue the matter further. He arranged for us to meet with 10th Homicide detectives 3 days after Christmas. In the meantime, I endeavored to learn as much as I could about the cult Larry and I discussed, the process. There undoubtedly were other satanic groups we could have considered and subsequently did consider, and there assuredly were still others of which we had no knowledge at all. If Berkowitz was a member of a small, strictly local group with no ties beyond Yonkers, we'd have to approach the investigation differently, but the dead German shepherds were a tangible parcel of evidence, and that breed of animal was in fact linked to the macabre group formerly known as the Process Church, or of the Final Judgment, and so it began. Initially, I was surprised to learn that most of the occult writings I pursued were bereft of any substantial information about the cult. Most references were vague. Later, through extensive field research and personal contacts with reliable sources in California and elsewhere, I was able to complete the biographical picture that is painted there. Among my advisors was Ed Sanders, author of The Family, a superb study of the Manson clan, who graciously sat with me in a wild blueberry patch in an upstate New York meadow one summer afternoon and significantly added to my knowledge of the shadowy cult. We convened in the open air Sanders' request. It's too distasteful a topic to go into anywhere else but out here, where the setting and surroundings are as far removed from what those people stand for as we can get, he explained. Sanders is not given to hyperbole. He is a thoughtful, sincere man and accomplished writer, poet, and musician. His band, the Fugs, became well known in the late 1960s, and the group still plays reunion tours on occasion. Sanders spent 18 months probing the grotesque world of Charlie Manson while researching The Family, and he hasn't forgotten what it was like. Neither, for that matter, have other sources who are still fearful of the group, erased the memories of those days when they came to know the process. The following is an overview of the organization which I and others consider to have been one of the most dangerous satanic cults in America. The process, as far as it is known, has now officially splintered, and its offspring, while still active, have gone underground. But before the process divided, it spread seeds of destruction throughout the United States. Those spores were carried on the winds of evil across the 1970s into the present. The terror still reigns, with far-flung subsidiary groups united by the sins of the father. But in the beginning, there was a man and a woman, and they came together in London, England. The year was 1963. Satanic cults lurk in various guises, and their recruitment techniques also differ. Some harvest via pseudo-legitimate counseling or self-awareness groups, actually fronts which frequently flourish around campuses or military bases or in major cities. And unsuspecting youth already possessed of a mind set ripe for manipulation will enroll for a series of courses, seminars, or therapy sessions allegedly intended to put his or her life into focus. What follows is a period of careful screening and weeding out. In time, the chosen few will find themselves drawn deeper and deeper into a web of deceit, rejection of traditional values, and conversion into the twisted beliefs of the group's leaders. At its outset, the Process was one of these groups. The Process Church of Final Judgment was born in London, England in 1963 and 64, the Damien child of two ranking members of the Church of Scientology, who split with the parent organization following some philosophical differences with the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard, the developer of Scientology. The founding couple of the Process, Robert Moore and Mary Ann McLean, had met while receiving advanced training at the Hubbard Institute of Scientology on London Fitzroy Street. Divorcing Hubbard, they married one another and adopted the cult name of de Grimston for themselves. Robert Moore de Grimston was born in Shanghai, China on August 10, 1935. David Berkowitz would be arrested on de Grimston's birthday. De Grimston, a tall, bearded blonde who affected a Christ-like appearance, was an educated man studying in Winchester, England, and late and later pursuing a career in architecture at the Regent Street Polytechnic Institute. His bride's background was checkered. Mary Ann McLean de Grimston was born illegitimately in Glasgow, Scotland, on November 20th, 1931. She reportedly endured a frustrating childhood, punctuated by tenure in a reform school. Marianne subsequently entered the United States, where she managed to meet former boxing champion Sugar Ray Robinson and became engaged to him. However, the relationship ended and Marianne returned to England, where she worked as a dance hall hostess. At a dwelling in London, she became romantically involved with several prominent British citizens during the days of the John Profumo Christine Keeler prostitution scandal, which rocked the British government in the early 1960s. At least one of those links to the Profumo affair, Dr. Stephen Ward, was an occult adept. Ward soon died in apparent suicide. It was during this tumultuous period that Robert Moore and Marianne McLean met while immersed in profound mental exercises at the Hubbard Institute of Scientology. On their own and with their new cult names, de Grimson began to experiment with sophisticated mind control games. They started a center to study what they termed compulsion analysis, for research into and elimination of compulsive behavior. They preached a doctrine of free choice, declaring that individuals were completely responsible for their own fates, actions, and afflictions. Do as thou wilt. Marianne, for instance, reportedly believed that Jews chose the gas chambers, and even birth defects were said to be freely selected and carried into the present from past lives, as the de Grimstons believed in reincarnation. The gods they worshipped were two in number, Jehovah and Lucifer. Not surprising, the fledgling process attracted a following. Young, searching, and distributed men and women were drawn to the group like metal to a magnet. The de Grimstons also actively recruited, particularly from the ranks of the wealthy young. The cult modus operandi is an important one, worthy of remembrance. Moneyed recruits served two purposes. First, they could be tapped for sizable donations that would allow the cult to expand and its leaders to maintain an appropriate lifestyle. Second, wealthy converts often held top jobs or had important connections, enabling the cult to gain entry into powerful business, entertainment, government, and financial circles, laying the foundation for an influential cultic old boy network. In March 1966, the de Grimstons, flush with success, leased a mansion to the Balfour Palace in London's fashionable Mayfair section. Now totally absorbed with their power trip, they brought 25 groveling followers into the house with them. Here, the German shepherds entered the picture. As the de Grimstons each obtained a large Alsatian, a breed of German shepherd, to mirror their leaders, the acolytes also purchased German shepherds, and the canine corps grew to over 30 in number. The de Grimstons weren't content with the limited operation, however. In the tradition of egomaniacal gurus everywhere, they decided to expand internationally. Accordingly, they, along with 18 disciples and a number of Alsatians, embarked for Nassau in the Bahamas in June 1966. They lulled for Nassau for 6 weeks before leasing a large tract of land on the beach of Zitol, Mexico, which is situated on the Yucatan Peninsula. The Mexican period was a significant one. While the Zitol, the processes two gods, Lucifer and Jehovah, were joined by a third, Satan, for the first time. The group began conducting moonlight satanic rituals. Also at Zetul, the notion of founding a formal process church evolved. To process members, the Zetul experience was the equivalent of Christ's 40 days and 40 nights in the desert. Returning to England, the group sought out the famous striving to convert the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, among others. A bookstore was opened, a coffee house perked, and a process magazine rolled off the presses. The cult was enamored of bloodshed and war, and its magazine reflected this obsession. Hitler was considered a noble gentleman worthy of admiration and worship. In this, the era of flower power, the process briefly managed to entrap singer Marianne Faithfull, a close companion of the Rolling Stones. In one issue of Process magazine, she was pictured supine as if dead, clutching a rose. In late 1967, Robert de Grimston published a book, As It Is, which spelled out the process's philosophy. Christ said, "Love thine enemy." Christ's enemy was Satan, and Satan's enemy was Christ. Through love, enmity is destroyed. Through love, saint and sinner destroy the enmity between them. Through love, Christ and Satan have destroyed their enmity and come together for the end. Christ to judge, Satan to execute the judgment. The key to this treaty is contained in the sentence which says that Christ and Satan have joined forces to bring about the end of the world. Christ, according to the process, was employing Satan as a hitman, so worshipping Satan was akin to worshipping Christ, and killing in the name of Satan was actually killing for Christ, a divine mission. Naturally, de Grimston was thought by process members to be Christ, and they, in adoring Satan, with the agents of God working under divine orders to save the world from itself by hastening the day of the second coming, in the end, the cult would strive to build a new world of satanic glory. From the Bible, the signs of the second coming were evident. The fires of Armageddon, death, chaos, and confusion. The process firmly believed its divine duty was to hasten the arrival of the final days, and bastardizing the Bible told them how to do it. This was a blueprint for murder, butchery, and other crimes cloaked in religious justification. Would the disenfranchised, rebellious, or power-hungry swallow this perverse theology? Most assuredly. The de Grimstons believed, and they prepared a "Go ye forth and teach all nations" crusade which swept into the United States in late 1967. My prophecy upon this wasted earth and upon the corrupt creation that squats upon its ruined surface is, "Thou shalt kill." It is not known if the process members seeping into San Francisco in the autumn of the Summer of Love distributed pamphlets containing that quote from Robert de Grimston, Book of Jehovah on War. But arrive they did, bringing their German shepherds, magazines, recruitment raps, and twisted theology with them. In the United States, this was the era of burgeoning student unrest. The Vietnam War was igniting protests. Parental values were under siege. Psychedelic music was the rage. Dope was rampant. The hippie movement's flower children were in full bloom. The summer of 1967 and the crossroads of Haight and Ashbury transformed San Francisco into Mecca. Timothy Leary was advising youth to turn on, tune in, and drop out. It was an age of do your own thing, do as I will. Free love and transcendental meditation. Even the Beatles were grooving on the Maharishi and singing "All You Need Is Love." This was fertile ground for the process to plow. The cult was at this time arranged into three subgroups which represented its three gods. The Jehovah's were straight-laced and uncompromising. The Puritans of the sect, the Luciferians, in contrast, literally embraced each other, advocating sensuality, tranquility, and the free use of narcotics. Finally, Satanists believe what Satanists everywhere believe in: gore, violence, sacrifices, and devil worship. New process members were free to select the discipline of their choice. Oh, yeah, you got a large selection there. This option mattered little to the de Grimstons, since, according to their preachings, all three branches would converge for the final judgment, which would mark the end of the world as non-members, the gray forces of moderation, knew it to be. For processians, no matter which god they bowed to, it was a joyous time. The end was coming, and they, as the chosen people, were going to be part of the big event. Landing in California, the process was just another group of the proselytizers hawking their wares in an already teeming marketplace. They attracted little official attention, since law enforcement authorities lumped them into the same category as other messianic minions littering the streets with their literature. But there was a difference here. The process was dangling a carrot seasoned for a variety of taste buds, and thus was able to entice a sizable number of recruits. Death and violence advocates were attracted by the Satanist wing of the and the promise of upcoming end of the world rampage and destruction. Free love and dope aficionados were seduced by the Luciferians, and self-flagellating hair shirts were drawn to the strict forbidding Jehovah's. And it should be noted here that Christ-Satan duality was very appealing to an aging flower child by the name of Charles Mills Manson. Manson's considerable connections to the process will be explored later. However, it would not be inappropriate to reveal at this point that Manson was heavily influenced by the group. In San Francisco, the process set up house on Cole Street and later moved to a more amenable residence on Oak Street. In March 1968, after spreading the news in the North, a contingent consisting of 30 members, accompanied by more than a dozen Alsatian dogs, drove down the coast to Weirdness West Los Angeles. In L.A., they rented a large house on South Cochrane Street, from where they descended on Sunset Strip like so many vultures in quest of cadavers. There they vacuumed up new disciples from the swarms of runaways, cast-off bikers, dopers, and other outsiders for whom the Strip was home. But true to form, the process approached the elite as well as the down-and-outers. Singer John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas, Mama Cass Elliot herself, and Terry Melcher, son of Doris Day, and a TV and record producer, were among those in show business sought out by the group, apparently with mixed success. Jesus Christ, this is a long one. That just feels long. Fuck. Oh man, 3 more pages. The process, not surprisingly, was fond of the color black. They wore black capes, some with the Mendez goat of Satan stitched in red on the back. Underneath, they donned black robes or suits and turtlenecks, and adorned their necks with silver crosses. Some wore a Menendez goat pin. The official process symbol, paying homage to the idolized Hitler, was a form of inverted swastika. On the streets of Los Angeles in the spring of 1968, the process was distributing the sex issue of Process magazine. Its front cover displayed a photo of a satanic ceremony showing a naked girl lying on an altar surrounded by a band of hooded cultists. An inverted cross shadowed the scene. The back cover contained a rendering of a winged skeleton suspended over a pile of naked bodies. The humans' mouths gaping apparently were either dead or in hell or both. The inner pages of this charming piece of literature contained articles relating to black masses and necrophilia, the practice of performing sexual or other violations on corpses. A subsequent issue of Process magazine was devoted to fear, On the back cover of this publication, a band of marching Nazis spewed from the mouth of a fiery pink skull. The Nazis were trampling on a group of people being consumed by fire. Elsewhere in this same illustration, the face of Hitler appeared on a funhouse mirror, and a human being was shown burning to death. At the top of the page, a legend promised the next issue, Death. The magazine's center spread was devoted to an unholy alliance of the Lamb of God and the Goat of Satan. A caption read, "The Lamb and the Goat must come together. Pure love descended from the pinnacle of heaven, united with pure hatred raised from the depths of hell." Other articles of great interest in the Fear issue included a page of quotes about fear from members of the Hells Angels biker group. The process actively recruited bikers, considering them the frontline troops of the great war to come. An essay entitled "Satan is Fear," and a picture of 24 process elation dogs menacing the camera. Regarding the obsession with fear, it is not a coincidence that one of Charlie Manson's favorite lectures to his followers revolved around the expression of getting the fear. An incredible process As incredible as Process magazine was, its rantings about could only be considered routine, coming as they did from a group whose leader, Robert de Grimston, wrote in Satan on War, "Release the fiend that lies dormant within you, for he is strong and ruthless, and his power is far beyond the bounds of human frailty." Was a more divine trumpet or violence ever blown? Was the process What the process had managed to do was to envelop isolated weirdness freaks from various social backgrounds and mix them together. It was a volatile brew, and the common cause resulted in long-standing alliances being sealed. I have spoken to several professional people, including educators, who remain sympathetic to the group's theology. So any impression that the cult managed to attract only society's misfits would be erroneous. I need a bit of a break. Jesus Christ. In terms of ranking, there were 6 levels of membership in the group, which borrowed from the family structure for its inspiration. In fact, the process referred to itself as the family, as Manson did with his group. It is yet another interesting link between Manson and the process, and there are many more. For instance, cult names were substituted for legal names once initiates reached a certain level of process indoctrination. This was another practice Manson utilized for many in his family. The lowest level in the process was that of acolyte, followed by initiate and messenger, the rank at which the recruit acquired his or her cult name, such as Brother Tom, Sister Rebecca, Father Jonas. From the rank of messenger, the aspiring cultist, aspiring cultist graduated to prophet, priest, and ultimately master. At one point in the journey, all members, regardless of their chosen god, were required to enter a long period of satanic worship, which reportedly included blood rituals and sacrifice. Accepted processions then formally convened twice each month to summon their 3 gods, who would then speak through the mouths of the gathered cult members. Most of the original cultists were British citizens who apparently came to America on 90-day visitors' visas. Some extensions of time were granted, but eventually in the summer of 1968, many of the group suddenly dropped from sight. Some, it was said, returned to England, but others appeared to have remained in the United States clandestinely. The de Grimstons themselves headed for New York City, where the Process Church was established on Cornelia Street in Greenwich Village in late 1968. In addition to the church, numerous members lived in a building on East 12th Street, while the Grimstons stayed in Brooklyn. As in California, the process recruited among the artists, poets, and hordes of counterculture youth who frequented the village. Later, a cult spokesman told the United Press International that more than 200 Americans were fully converted to the faith. Process contingents subsequently materialized in New Orleans, Dallas, Toronto, Chicago, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, among other locations. In a development that is critical to this story, once the group's leadership turned over the reins to a local disciples in Los Angeles, power plays and political infighting inevitably resulted. Differences in philosophy and theology also arose, as the cult went underground there in the aftermath of the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy, perhaps concerned that law enforcement would hear of the Sirhan's occult interests and alleged acquaintance with a process member. Secret process chapters or spin-offs using other names were established in Northern and Southern California. Not so coincidentally, since certain members' movements were traced, authorities soon began finding bodies of mutilated, decapitated, or exsanguinated dogs, including numerous German shepherds, in the Santa Cruz area south of San Francisco. Some of the animals were skinned, prompting a Humane Society official to comment on the killer's abilities with knives. Reports of human sacrifice were also relayed to the police, including one from a gentleman named Stanley Baker, who was himself arrested for an out-of-state murder. Baker, who said he was a member of Santa Cruz cult, carried a finger bone from his recent unfortunate victim in a leather pouch. Upon his arrest, he delivered one of criminal history's epic comments to authorities. "I have a problem. I am a cannibal." Baker, who spotted a swastika tattoo and other occult emblems, said he was recruited from a campus setting in Wyoming. He participated in blood-drinking rituals there, was further programmed, and then joined the California activities. Programmed, you say? Interesting word. Concerning the particular victim, Baker told the police he murdered the man, cut out his heart, and ate it. Baker and at least one other witness told authorities the Santa Cruz group later headed back downstate, where they resumed their obnoxious rituals, including murder in the O'Neill Park area of Santa Ana Mountains, south of Los Angeles. This cult, a process splinter group, was said by witnesses to call itself the 4P movement, or 4Pi. Its leader, alleged to be prosperous LA businessman or doctor, was known as the Grand Qigong. Interestingly, Ed Sanders stated that on several occasions in his presence, Manson family members referred to Charlie as the Grand Qigong. However, Manson was under arrest at that time and the cult was still functioning, so he was not the Grand Qigong. But a key question remains. How did Manson's followers know the cult name of the leader of this top-secret slaughter society? It should be mentioned here that there is no evidence available which implicates the de Grimstons themselves in these alleged Qigong cult crimes. Shortly after the 4P cult relocated to Los Angeles in the early 1969, another split apparently occurred. Some 4P members decided there was too much emphasis on sacrifice and devil worship and not enough sex. This faction apparently went off on its own, leaving the Grand Qigong and his remaining followers to carry on their business of draining and drinking the blood of sacrificed dogs and humans. There is a curious similarity here to differences which arose in the parent process between the sensual Luciferians and the hardcore Satanists. According to the witnesses, including Baker, the Qigong cult practiced its rituals on the basis of stellar, timeable, and employed its own cultic terminology. The group was alleged to process a portable crematorium to dispose of victims' remains, an ornate wooden altar, and specifically designed sacrificial knife with 6 blades. That's new for me. You got a portable fucking crematory? Shit's wild. A biker who belonged to the cult did provide the police with one name, Erickson, but authorities were unable to find him, as many in cults go by names other than their own, or by first names only. Rounding up perpetrators is at best an extremely difficult task. Moreover, such underground groups are mobile, often meeting at a variety of remote locations in the dead of night. And informants are scarce due to the fear factor and blood oaths of loyalty often taken by members. Plus, of course, almost any information was likely to have been an active accomplice in murder himself, and as such would have little incentive to provide information to the police. Baker incessantly did not renounce his satanic proclivities. When sentenced to prison for the brutal heart meal murder he acknowledged committing, authorities report that he actively and regularly conspired to organize a devil-worshipping cult among his fellow inmates. Apparently an otherwise model prisoner, he was eligible for release in mid-1985. But his parole board, for whatever reason, was finding it difficult to locate a halfway house willing to accept him. Lower-ranking Satanists such as Baker often literally believe in havoc they wreak, but the cult leaders are likely to be motivated much by power and greed as they are by infernal incantations. It is possible to visualize the structure of the process left in place, the network of cult contacts between various cities, and it is also possible to envision how such a structure, staffed by willing satanic slaves, could be employed for purposes that could greatly benefit a handful of leaders, both monetarily in terms of drug distribution and child pornography, for instance, CIA. And personally, in terms of power, influence, and immense ego gratification. To those leaders, allegiance to Satan is a secondary, convenient avocation. The process and its secret offshoot didn't have the Southern California or U.S. occult scene or philosophies to themselves. Master black magician Aleister Crowley, who died in 1947, had written of a unification of God and Satan. That precept and other Crowleyisms found their way into process doctrine. By sharing Aleister Crowley's beliefs, the process also blended those of the Order of the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn was an English occult society to which Crowley belonged. In the late 19th century, the Golden Dawn believed in Kabbalistic magic and taught that the will could be trained to accomplish paranormal effects, including astral projection. The Golden Dawn also strongly believed in symbolism, teaching that certain symbols or thoughts had the same meaning for all human beings. After internal dissension, elements of the Golden Dawn more or less merged into Ordo Templis Orientis, OTO, a German occult society founded in 1902. The OTO accused Crowley of revealing one of its most secret precepts, that sex could be employed for the purpose of magic. But after mending some fences, Crowley won permission to head British OTO branch, a British OTO branch, and the teachings of the OTO entered the United States with Crowley in 1916 during World War I in Europe. Later during World War II, Crowley helped establish an OTO lodge in Pasadena, California, and OTO branches subsequently sprouted in a number of U.S. cities, including New York and Houston. In effect, a loose network was formed and already functioned via occult shops and bookstores. Newsletters, ads in the underground press, and other methods include personal contacts. By the time the process arrived in 1967, in fact, many believe that entire occult underground in America today can be traced back to the formation of that Crowley OTO operation in Pasadena. The process then incorporated the ideas that the process then incorporated the ideas of a number of its ancestors and current occupants of the occult landscape, including the OTO. Accordingly, there was intermingling of philosophy, membership, and networking among the groups. This arrangement makes labeling a difficult, restrictive measure. Charles Manson, for example, was exposed to the practices of a renegade OTO lodge in Southern California, as well as having been influenced by the process. During the Christmas season of 1977, my research of the process, its offspring, and allies was not nearly as complete as presented here. At that time, I merely learned enough about the group and network to consider if a definite possibility that Berkowitz, which may have been involved somehow with a branch of that treacherous English society or one of its OTO counterparts, but I was still facing the task of finding corroboration to buttress the occult clues in the Son of Sam letters and the dead German Shepherd connection. In order for the cult to overall conspiracy suspicions to stand up undeniably, we either had to find the group itself, put Berkowitz or John Carr into such an organization to uncover other evidence demonstrating a conspiracy existed, evidence that there was either cult related or tied to the 44 caliber crimes themselves. Simply stated, that is how the entire investigation was instructed to try to find the proof we needed. As the year drew to a close, Christmas Day would bring some unexpected information about John Carr, and after that there would be Murder in the Wind. But as we geared down for the holiday, no one could have foreseen that this was to be the Yule tide for a number of people connected to the Son of Sam case. For them, the final judgment was near. Bit of a longer one today, wasn't it? My goodness. Baby, baby bear knows. That is that good.
Come on, guys. Let's go inside. Watch out, phone. Go on, Buster Nuts. Come on, Cat. Oh, so why's everybody been? Sorry, baby. I could open some things. That was a heck of a lot of reading. B, you leave Cow alone. B. Your butt's looking a little fluffy. I might just have to get you. Cell phone. I'm gonna make a pizza for myself.